The bank teller's arrogant smirk vanished as she tore the veteran's check into pieces, a moment of cruelty that would soon unleash unprecedented chaos. The quiet dignity in the old soldier's eyes gave way to something darker as the fragments of paper fell like snow onto the counter between them. Within minutes, the pristine calm of First National would transform into a battleground no one had anticipated. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Smith stood at the polished counter of Atlanta's Midtown Community Bank, his scarred hands gently clutching a government-issued disability check. The fluorescent lights reflected off the marble floor as he slid the $3,847 document across the counter. Years of military service had taught him patience, but today that virtue would be tested beyond measure. Sarah Johnson barely glanced up from her computer terminal, her Employee of the Month badge gleaming under the harsh lighting. Her fingers, adorned with perfectly manicured nails, snatched the check with visible disdain. The teller's eyes narrowed as she examined the document, her lips curling into a dismissive smirk. "This looks fake, just like all of them," Sarah announced loudly, her voice carrying across the hushed lobby. Without hesitation, she ripped the check in half, the sound of tearing paper echoing through the space like a gunshot. John's expression remained unchanged, a stillness born from surviving 3 overseas tours. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed any emotion as he watched the fragments of his livelihood flutter down to the marble floor like wounded birds. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the public humiliation. "That was a legitimate government check." Behind him, Miss Wu gasped audibly, her elderly hands fumbling with her smartphone. The Chinese-American woman's fingers trembled as she activated her Facebook app, her eyes wide with disbelief at the scene unfolding before her. "This isn't right," she whispered to herself, positioning her device to capture the confrontation. Paul Williams, the security guard stationed near the entrance, shifted his weight uncomfortably. The former veteran recognized something in John's composure, a familiar dignity that came from service. Still, he remained at his post, paycheck warring with conscience. All around the bank lobby, the mundane afternoon routine dissolved as customers craned their necks toward the disturbance. A businessman in an expensive suit checked his watch impatiently but couldn't tear his eyes away. A young mother hushed her fussing child, drawn to the brewing conflict like everyone else. Sarah's voice cut through the tension again. "If you want to dispute this, you'll need to speak with management." Her tone suggested she expected, perhaps even hoped for, an outburst that would justify escalation. John carefully placed his palms flat on the counter, his scarred hands telling a story that Sarah had chosen not to read. The torn pieces of the check lay between them, a battlefield neither had anticipated when the day began. Sarah Johnson crossed her arms defensively, a smug grin spreading across her lips, as her blonde highlights caught the harsh fluorescent light overhead. The Employee of the Month badge gleamed on her chest like a shield of authority. She tapped her manicured nails against the marble countertop, the sound echoing through the suddenly quiet bank lobby. "I'd like to speak with your manager," John Smith said quietly. His voice remained steady, tempered by years of military service and surviving situations far worse than this public humiliation. The scars on his hands seemed to tighten as he clenched and unclenched his fists, a subtle exercise in self-control. "Of course you do," Sarah replied with exaggerated politeness. "Everyone wants to speak to the manager when they don't get their way." She made no move to fulfill his request, instead glancing around the bank, as if seeking approval from her audience. The air in the Midtown Community Bank grew thick with tension. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes while others stared openly at the confrontation. A businessman checked his watch impatiently, torn between leaving and witnessing what might happen next. Behind John, Mrs. Liu fumbled with arthritic fingers to retrieve her smartphone from her purse. The elderly woman's hands trembled slightly, whether from age or indignation wasn't clear. With surprising dexterity for someone her age, she opened the Facebook Live application and positioned her device to capture the scene unfolding before her. "You'll need to see this," she whispered into her phone, her voice barely audible yet somehow carrying through the tense atmosphere. "They're treating this veteran terribly." Sarah noticed the recording and straightened her posture, doubling down rather than backing off. "Ma'am, we have a privacy policy in this establishment," she said loudly, but made no real move to stop the live stream. All around, customers craned their necks, drawn to the spectacle brewing at the center of the bank. Some pulled out their own devices, sensing something significant was happening. The security guard, Paul Williams, shifted his weight from one foot to another, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but uncertain whether to intervene. John stood perfectly still, his military training evident in his posture. His calm demeanor seemed to irritate Sarah even more, who clearly expected, perhaps even wanted him to lose his composure. "I'm just trying to cash a legitimate check," John explained to no one in particular, his voice carrying through the bank. "A check I earned serving this country." The digital counter on Mrs. Liu's livestream ticked upward as viewers began joining, drawn to the unfolding drama in an Atlanta bank on what should have been an ordinary March afternoon. Michael Davis emerged from the back office with an air of practiced importance. His tie hung loosely around his neck, sleeves rolled up as if he'd been handling something far more significant than paperwork. The assistant manager's eyes swept over the growing commotion before landing on John Smith, sizing him up with a dismissive glance. "What seems to be the problem?" Michael asked, directing his question to Sarah rather than John. The teller quickly recounted her suspicions, gesturing dramatically at the torn check on the counter. Michael barely looked at the fragments of the government document. Instead, he adjusted his posture, standing taller as he addressed John with the kind of patronizing tone reserved for troublesome customers. "Sir, we have protocols for suspicious documents," he explained, as if speaking to a child. "Our tellers are trained to identify potential fraud. It's nothing personal." John kept his scarred hands flat on the marble counter, his military discipline evident in his controlled demeanor. Several customers had stopped their transactions to watch the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "I'd like a corporate number and some tape to repair my check," John replied evenly. "This is a legitimate government-issued disability check. There's been a mistake." Michael exchanged a knowing look with Sarah, the kind that suggested they dealt with people like this all the time. He let out a short, dismissive laugh that echoed through the suddenly quiet bank lobby. "Corporate won't waste time on this," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Trust me, I've been in banking for 8 years. We know what we're looking at." The assistant manager leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice but still loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Look, if this was legitimate, it wouldn't have torn so easily. Government checks have security features." John's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, not anger but a quiet assessment. He studied Michael's face with the same calm intensity that had kept him alive through 3 overseas tours. "I understand you believe you're doing your job," John said, "but I need this resolved today. That check represents compensation I earned." Michael crossed his arms, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light as he shifted his weight. The power dynamic was clear in his mind. He was the authority figure, and this customer, regardless of his military service, was just another person trying to cash a suspicious check. "If you want to file a complaint, you're welcome to do so," Michael offered with artificial politeness. "But for now, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. We have other customers waiting." Behind John, Mrs. Liu's Facebook live stream was gaining traction at an alarming rate. What had started with just a handful of viewers had quickly multiplied to dozens. Then hundreds of concerned citizens watching the confrontation unfold in real time. The elderly woman's trembling fingers had managed to type a compelling title, "Veteran Being Humiliated at Midtown Bank." Comments flooded the feed, each ping on her device drawing more attention from other customers. Sarah Johnson seemed oblivious to the digital audience gathering. She tapped her manicured nails rhythmically against the counter, a smug expression fixed on her face. The fluorescent lights caught the shiny badge pinned prominently to her blouse, Employee of the Month, March 2024. She wore the accolade like armor, as if it somehow justified her treatment of the man standing before her. "Is there a problem?" asked a customer from the growing line, his patience visibly wearing thin. Michael Davis ignored the question, focusing instead on establishing his dominance. The assistant manager spread his stance wider, physically blocking John's path to any other teller. His rolled-up sleeves revealed tense forearms as he leaned forward. "Look, sir," Michael said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we can't just cash every piece of paper that walks in. There are procedures." The crowd around them had grown, their collective murmur rising like a tide. One by one, phones emerged from pockets and purses, their camera lenses pointed directly at the confrontation. A young mother shifted her baby to her hip to free a hand for recording. Two college students whispered to each other as they angled for a better view. John remained composed, his scarred hands resting calmly on the counter despite the humiliation. He'd faced worse in his military tours overseas, but something about this public degradation cut deep. He noticed Miss Lee's determined expression as she held her device steady, becoming his unexpected advocate. "I understand procedures," John replied evenly, "but tearing up a government check isn't one of them." Michael scoffed, exchanging a knowing look with Sarah. The teller's lips curled into a satisfied smile, clearly feeling protected by her superior's presence. The digital audience continued to grow exponentially. Comments scrolled rapidly on Mrs. Liu's screen. "This is outrageous. Someone call the news. I'm never banking there again." The tension in the bank lobby was palpable, hanging heavy in the air as more witnesses documented every word, every gesture, every moment of this increasingly public spectacle. No one knew it yet, but this ordinary afternoon at Midtown Community Bank was about to become anything but ordinary. John calmly reached into his jacket, causing Michael to tense visibly. The assistant manager's hand instinctively moved toward the panic button beneath the counter, his body language betraying his assumptions. But John only produced a worn leather portfolio with gold initials, J. The leather was soft from years of handling, its corners rounded with age. "There's a misunderstanding," John said, his voice unwavering despite the public humiliation unfolding around him. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the quiet dignity in his expression. "This is a real government check. I served 3 tours overseas." Sarah Johnson's skepticism dripped from her words like venom. "You got something to prove that?" Her fingers drummed impatiently on the marble countertop, the Employee of the Month badge gleaming on her chest as if to underscore her authority in this matter. Without breaking eye contact, John reached into the portfolio and placed his military ID on the counter. The credentials displayed his service decorations: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Infantry Badge, each emblem telling its own story of sacrifice and courage. The plastic glinted in the harsh bank lighting, a small piece of his history laid bare for strangers to judge. Michael barely glanced at the identification, his dismissal immediate and cutting. "IDs can be faked too," he scoffed, exchanging a knowing look with Sarah. "You wouldn't believe what people try to pull these days." John's scarred hands remained steady as they rested on the counter. Those hands had once diffused explosives under enemy fire, yet here they were, being treated as the hands of a potential criminal. He took a measured breath, the kind of breath that had kept him alive in combat zones when panic would have meant death. "This check is legitimate," John insisted, his tone remaining professional despite the growing tension. "It's issued by the United States government. The security features are all present." Sarah leaned forward, her blonde highlights catching the light as she narrowed her eyes at the torn pieces of paper. "Well, it doesn't look legitimate to me," she declared, loud enough for the growing audience of customers to hear. "And we have protocols for suspicious documents." Behind them, Mrs. Liu continued her quiet documentation, her phone capturing every exchange, every microaggression, every moment of this unfolding injustice. The viewer count on her Facebook live stream ticked steadily upward as Atlanta residents and beyond tuned in to witness the confrontation. Michael crossed his arms, his rolled-up sleeves revealing a watch that cost more than the check in question. "Sir, if you want to dispute this, you'll need to contact the issuing agency. We can't help you here." The line of customers grew longer, their faces tight with anger and disbelief as they watched the confrontation unfold. A businessman in a sharp suit repeatedly checked his expensive watch, tapping his foot with growing irritation. Behind him, a young mother bounced her crying infant on her hip, torn between soothing her distressed child and raising her phone to capture what was happening at the counter. "This is outrageous," someone muttered from the back of the line. The tension in the air was palpable, spreading through the bank lobby like an invisible current. Mrs. Liu's trembling fingers steadied as she continued her Facebook Live broadcast. The viewer count ticked upward, 200, 250, 300. Comments flooded the stream faster than anyone could read them. "Call the news. This is racial profiling. I'm sharing this everywhere." The elderly woman's eyes widened behind her glasses as she realized how quickly her impromptu broadcast was spreading. "I can't just treat people like this," she whispered to her phone, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. John Smith remained a pillar of composure at the center of the growing storm. His scarred hands rested flat on the counter, neither clenched nor trembling. Years of military service had taught him to remain calm under pressure, far more intense than this. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a notification that his board meeting had been moved to 4 o'clock, but he ignored it, keeping his focus entirely on the situation at hand. The security guard, Paul Williams, shifted his weight uncomfortably near the entrance, recognizing something in John's demeanor that the bank staff seemed oblivious to. One veteran recognizing another. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," Michael said, his voice louder now, clearly performing for the growing audience of onlookers. Sarah Johnson smirked behind the counter, adjusting her Employee of the Month badge so it caught the light. She exchanged a knowing glance with a co-worker, seemingly enjoying the spectacle she had created. The businessman finally lost his patience. "Some of us have actual appointments to keep," he snapped, but his eyes betrayed curiosity about the unfolding drama. Through it all, John's expression never changed. His calm demeanor belied the storm brewing around him, a storm he understood far better than anyone else in the building. He checked his watch discreetly, noting the time with an almost imperceptible nod. "I'm not leaving until this is resolved properly," he stated, his voice even and controlled. The quiet certainty in his tone caused several onlookers to exchange glances. Something about this man didn't match the narrative the bank staff was trying to create. "I understand you're just doing your job," John told Michael, voice even and measured. The bank's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his scarred hands as they rested on the counter. "But I need this resolve." His military training was evident in his composure. 3 tours overseas had taught him to remain calm under pressure, far greater than this. Michael Davis glanced around at the growing audience of customers, seemingly emboldened by their attention. His volume rose deliberately, his tie hanging loose as he leaned forward. "You think you're entitled to special treatment? This is how the real world works, sir." The assistant manager's emphasis on "sir" carried a mocking tone that rippled through the bank lobby. Several customers shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Liu's trembling fingers steadied as she angled her phone to capture every word, the Facebook Live comment section exploding with outrage. The view count ticked upward with each passing second. "Some of us work for our money," Michael continued, gesturing vaguely at John's casual attire. The implication hung in the air that John's disability check was somehow unearned charity rather than compensation for service and sacrifice. Sarah Johnson leaned forward over her teller station, her Employee of the Month badge gleaming under the lights. She spoke loudly, clearly intending for everyone in line to hear. "We see this all the time, people trying to cash fake checks with fake ID." Her blonde highlights caught the light as she shook her head with practiced disappointment. "It's our job to protect the bank." The teller's words painted John with the broad brush of suspicion, her eyes flickering with something darker than mere professional concern. There was satisfaction there, pleasure in the power she wielded from behind her counter. John remained still, his military ID still visible on the counter between them. The Purple Heart and Bronze Star insignias caught the light, ignored by both bank employees. "That check represents compensation for service to this country," he stated quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness. A businessman checking his watch looked up, his irritation at the delay transforming into interest as he observed the unfolding scene. The young mother with her baby had stopped bouncing her child, both of them now silent as they watched. "Everyone has a story," Sarah replied, dismissively, exchanging a knowing look with Michael. "But policy is policy." John checked his watch briefly, a gesture that seemed to irritate Michael further. The assistant manager's face flushed slightly as he interpreted the action as impatience rather than the careful timing it actually was. "Is there anyone else I can speak with?" John asked, his calm persistence clearly frustrating both employees. Behind him, Mrs. Liu's viewer count continued to climb steadily, the digital audience growing increasingly invested in his plight. John's patience never wavered as he stood at the counter, his scarred hands resting calmly on the marble surface. The years of military service had taught him to maintain composure under far worse circumstances than this. "I'd appreciate it if you'd refrain from making assumptions about my character," he said, his voice measured and dignified despite the humiliation unfolding around him. Sarah Johnson's eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down with undisguised contempt. She gestured dramatically at his simple attire, faded jeans, plain t-shirt, and worn work boots, items chosen specifically for today's undercover assessment. "You walk in here looking like that, and expect us to just hand over thousands," she scoffed, her Employee of the Month badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "We have protocols for a reason." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and pointed. Several customers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the prejudice behind her words. The branch had grown noticeably colder, as if the air conditioning had suddenly kicked into high gear. In reality, it was the chill of collective discomfort spreading through the space. The young mother bounced her fussing baby while angling her smartphone to capture the confrontation. The businessman in the expensive suit had abandoned any pretense of disinterest, his device held high to record the interaction. Even the security guard, Paul Williams, looked increasingly uneasy, his hand fidgeting with his belt as professional obligation warred with his veteran's conscience. "Appearance isn't an indicator of legitimacy," John replied, his calm demeanor only seeming to irritate Sarah further. "The check is government-issued and valid." Mrs. Liu's trembling fingers adjusted her phone's position, ensuring she captured every moment of the unfolding scene. The viewer count on her Facebook live stream ticked upward steadily, 300, 400, now surpassing 500 people watching in real time. The comments section exploded with outrage, viewers demanding justice for the veteran being publicly humiliated. "Look at him," Sarah whispered loudly to Michael Davis, not bothering to lower her voice. "Probably found that military ID in the trash." The assistant manager nodded in agreement, his arms crossed defensively across his chest. Neither noticed how their every word and micro-expression was being captured by the forest of phones around them, documenting their behavior for an audience that grew by the minute. John checked his watch discreetly. He had anticipated resistance during this field assessment, but the blatant prejudice surprised even him. Still, he maintained his cover, knowing that what happened in the next 30 minutes would determine the future of this branch, and possibly the careers of everyone behind that counter. 43 minutes left, John murmured quietly, checking his watch with a practiced glance. The silver timepiece caught the fluorescent light, momentarily drawing attention to the scars that crisscrossed his hands. Michael frowned, his brow furrowing as he leaned forward over the counter. "Left for what?" he demanded, suspicion coloring his voice. The assistant manager's loosened tie swung slightly as he shifted his weight, uncomfortable with John's cryptic comment. John didn't answer, his focus unbroken. His eyes remained fixed on the torn pieces of his disability check that lay scattered across the marble counter like fallen leaves. The silence between them stretched, taut and electric, as customers continued to watch the confrontation unfold. Miss Liu's trembling hands held her phone steady, the viewer count on her Facebook live stream climbing steadily as more people tuned in to witness the standoff. Around them, the bank's normal bustle had ceased entirely. The clicking of keyboards, the shuffling of papers, the quiet conversations, all had given way to an expectant hush. Even the security guard, Paul Williams, stood motionless near the entrance, his veteran's instincts telling him something significant was about to happen. At that moment, the branch manager's door opened with a decisive click. The sound cut through the tension like a knife, drawing all eyes to the far end of the lobby. Linda Martin emerged from her office, her heels striking a commanding rhythm against the polished floor. Her tailored blazer and perfectly styled hair projected an image of unassailable authority. She surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency, the torn check, the gathered crowd, the phones recording everything before her gaze settled on John. Her expression hardened as she approached, each step deliberate and measured. "What's happening here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. She positioned herself beside Michael, creating a united front against the customer they perceived as problematic. John remained still, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the manager's bristling energy. The businessman checking his watch nearby whispered something to another customer, their eyes never leaving the unfolding drama. The young mother with her baby had retreated to a corner, but her phone remained pointed toward the confrontation. Linda's eyes narrowed as she took in John's worn t-shirt and jeans, making the same snap judgment Sarah and Michael had before her. The branch manager crossed her arms, waiting for an explanation, unaware that her actions were being broadcast to thousands of viewers who were forming their own opinions about Midtown Community Bank and about the quiet man who stood at its center, counting down to something only he understood. Michael Davis straightened his tie with a nervous tug, his earlier confidence evaporating under the branch manager's scrutiny. Sweat beaded at his temples as he gestured toward John. "We have a potential fraud situation." This individual, Michael's voice carried across the bank lobby, the word individual hanging in the air like a slur, stripping John Smith of his humanity, his service, his very name. John stood motionless, his scarred hands resting on the counter. The casual cruelty wasn't new to him. He'd endured worse overseas, but here, in his own country, in a place of business, it cut differently. Mrs. Liu's arthritic fingers steadied her smartphone as the viewer count on her Facebook live stream surged past 1,900. John Smith remained unmoved, his scarred hands resting calmly on the counter where the torn pieces of his disability check lay scattered. "I'm not leaving until this is resolved," he replied, his military training evident in his composure. The businessman in the tailored suit stepped closer, his expensive smartphone aimed directly at Linda's authoritative stance. He'd abandoned any pretense of minding his own business, his earlier irritation now replaced with focused attention. The device captured every word, every gesture, preserving the moment for an audience that grew by the second. "This is unbelievable," the businessman muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I've never seen anything like this." At the ATM across the lobby, a teenage girl with bright blue hair abandoned her transaction, pulling out her phone and opening TikTok. "You guys won't believe what's happening at Midtown Bank right now," she whispered to her followers as she began streaming. "They're literally refusing to help a veteran cash his check." Linda's smile was pure ice as she leaned forward. "Then I'll have to call the police," she announced, her voice deliberately louder than necessary, clearly meant to intimidate. John didn't flinch. His eyes, which had seen combat across 3 overseas tours, remained steady. "Do what you feel is necessary," he said quietly. Mrs. Liu's Facebook live count continued to climb, now approaching 2,000 viewers. Comments flooded her screen faster than anyone could read them. A digital tidal wave of outrage and support for the veteran being humiliated before their eyes. "Is this how you treat all your customers?" asked a woman waiting in line, her voice trembling with indignation. "Or just the ones who don't look like they belong in your bank?" Linda shot her a warning glance. "This is a private matter." "Not anymore," the businessman countered, gesturing to the phones recording from every angle. "I think it stopped being private the moment your teller ripped up his check in front of everyone." The branch manager's confidence wavered for just a moment, the first crack in her professional veneer. She glanced at the growing audience, both physical and virtual, suddenly aware that what had begun as a routine rejection of a suspicious document had morphed into something far beyond her control. An elderly black man in line cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. His weathered hands gripped his cane as he leaned forward. "This doesn't seem right at all," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "The man is just trying to cash his check. We all saw it was a government document." Linda Martin whirled around, her perfectly pressed blazer twisting with her sharp movement. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed the elderly customer. "Unless you're directly involved in this situation, sir, I'd advise you to mind your own business." The coldness in her voice sent a ripple through the growing crowd of onlookers. The elderly man's wife, a petite woman with silver-framed glasses, gently tugged at his sleeve. "Harold, please," she whispered, but the determination in her husband's eyes remained undiminished. Though she pulled him back into the line, both of them kept their phones raised, capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. Other customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A mother with a toddler shifted nervously, while the businessman in the expensive suit raised his eyebrows, his device still recording. Linda straightened her name badge and turned toward the security desk. "Paul," she called out, her voice carrying an unmistakable command. "Please escort this gentleman out of our establishment." Paul Williams stood by the entrance, his uniform crisp but his expression troubled. The security guard's fingers tapped against his belt as internal conflict played across his features. As a veteran himself, he recognized something in John Smith's dignified stance. The way he held himself under pressure, the calm resilience that came from facing far worse situations than this bank confrontation. Paul had encountered actual criminals during his security career. He knew the telltale signs of deception, the nervous energy, the shifting eyes. John displayed none of these. Instead, he stood with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his truth. Yet Paul's gaze drifted to the framed photo of his children on his desk. His mortgage payment was due next week. His youngest needed braces. His paycheck, the security of it, outweighed the protests of his conscience. With reluctant steps, Paul moved forward across the marble floor, each footfall echoing in the tense silence. His hand hovered near his belt, not reaching for his radio but ready if needed. "Sir," he began, his voice lower than necessary, a small act of respect. "I need to ask you to come with me." Mrs. Liu's phone captured every second, her live stream audience growing by the hundreds. The comment section exploded with outrage as viewers witnessed Paul approaching John, the bank's final enforcer, moving into position. The tension in the bank crystallized as John found himself completely surrounded. Sarah Johnson planted herself directly in his path, arms folded across her chest, her Employee of the Month badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile, as if she'd personally caught a criminal in the act. To his right, Michael Davis pulled out his smartphone, camera pointed directly at John's face, documenting what the assistant manager clearly anticipated would be a routine removal of a troublemaker. "This will be good for training purposes," Michael muttered, his finger hovering over the record button. How to handle difficult customers. Linda Martin positioned herself strategically behind John, effectively cutting off any possibility of retreat toward the exit. The branch manager's heels clicked against the marble floor as she adjusted her stance, her expression cold and unyielding. "Paul, please escort this individual from the premises," Linda commanded, her voice carrying across the now silent lobby. Paul Williams approached with visible reluctance, his security uniform neat but his conscience clearly troubled. The guard's eyes met John's briefly, one veteran recognizing another before glancing away uncomfortably. His hand hovered near his belt, not reaching for anything, just a nervous gesture as he weighed his paycheck against what felt increasingly wrong. "Sir, I need you to come with me," Paul said quietly, the words mechanical and rehearsed. From her position near the deposit slips, Miss Liu's trembling hands held her device steady, capturing the entire scene. Her Facebook livestream had become an unexpected window into a disturbing tableau, 4 bank employees encircling a single customer like predators surrounding wounded prey. The viewer count surged past 3,000. Comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. "This is wrong," scrolled one comment. "I'm calling the Atlanta news stations right now," declared another. "Someone get this man a lawyer." The digital audience grew increasingly outraged as they witnessed the standoff. Several customers in line had their own phones raised now, recording from different angles, creating a surreal fishbowl effect where every word, every gesture would be preserved and scrutinized. John remained perfectly still at the center of this human cage, his scarred hands resting calmly at his sides. His military training had prepared him for far worse than this bank lobby confrontation. He surveyed each face surrounding him. Sarah's triumph, Michael's detachment, Linda's cold authority, and Paul's reluctance, taking mental notes with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was happening and where it would lead. The bank had fallen completely silent, except for the soft ping of incoming notifications on Mrs. Liu's phone as her audience continued to multiply, bearing digital witness to a moment that would soon spiral far beyond the control of anyone present. John checked his watch again, the silver timepiece glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. 38 minutes left, he stated calmly, his scarred hands steady despite the tension surrounding him. The businessman in the tailored suit leaned closer to his mobile device, whispering with growing intrigue, "Something's going on here. This guy keeps checking the time like he's waiting for something specific." His live stream viewers doubled in seconds as speculation ran wild in the comments. Linda Martin's professional demeanor cracked slightly, her authoritative posture stiffening as suspicion crept into her voice. "Left for what exactly? Are you threatening her?" The branch manager's hand hovered near the silent alarm button beneath the counter, her eyes darting between John and the security guard. John's unwavering composure only intensified the staff's unease. Just noting the time, he replied with the practiced patience of someone who had faced far worse situations. The calmness in his voice seemed to unnerve the bank employees more than any shouting could have. Sarah tossed her head, blonde highlights catching the light as she leaned forward over the counter. "He's probably got somewhere important to be," she sneered, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Like a job interview you'll never get." The teller's lips curled into a cruel smile as she looked John up and down, her Employee of the Month badge gleaming on her chest like a shield of immunity. The deliberate cruelty in her words rippled through the growing crowd. Several customers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances of disbelief. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering something about respect. Paul Williams, the security guard, averted his eyes, the conflict between duty and conscience evident in his rigid stance. The teenage girl by the ATM gasped audibly as her TikTok followers exploded with outrage. "Did you all hear what she just said to him?" she whispered into her device. "This is getting wild. The comments are blowing up." Her fingers flew across the screen, struggling to keep up with the torrent of reactions. Mrs. Liu's Facebook live stream counter ticked upward relentlessly, comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. 4,000 viewers now, she announced quietly to no one in particular, her elderly hands trembling slightly as she held her phone steady. Michael Davis moved closer to Sarah, a silent show of solidarity that did nothing to ease the mounting tension. The assistant manager's rolled-up sleeves and loosened tie gave him the appearance of someone preparing for conflict rather than resolution. Throughout it all, John remained still, a center of calm in the growing storm, his eyes occasionally drifting to his watch as if counting down to something inevitable that only he could see. Linda Martin reached for her phone with deliberate slowness, her manicured fingers gripping the device as if it were a weapon. Her eyes never left John's face as she held it up for everyone to see. "I'm calling the police," she announced, voice projecting to reach every corner of the bank. The threat hung in the air, intended to make John Smith crumble. But John merely shrugged, his scarred hands resting calmly on the counter. "That's your choice," he replied, the evenness of his tone more unsettling than any anger could have been. The branch fell into an eerie silence. The usual background symphony, the clicking of keyboards, the shuffling of papers, the murmur of financial discussions, all faded away. It was as if someone had pressed mute on the entire building. Only the soft electronic chimes of ATM machines punctuated the tension. Every customer stood frozen, their phones raised like digital witnesses. Mrs. Liu's livestream continued uninterrupted, her trembling hands capturing every moment for the thousands now watching online. The comment section exploded with outrage, but inside the bank the silence was deafening. Linda's finger hovered over the keypad, her confidence wavering slightly at John's lack of concern. She had expected fear, perhaps pleading, not this unnerving calm. Michael Davis stepped forward, attempting to reclaim control of the situation that was rapidly slipping away from the bank staff. His tie hung askew, and a thin sheen of sweat had formed on his forehead. "Look," the assistant manager said, forcing a reasonable tone that didn't match his rigid posture. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just walk away." John turned to face him fully, his gaze steady and penetrating. There was something in those eyes, not anger but a quiet certainty, that made Michael take an involuntary step backward. "Who exactly," John asked softly, "do you think is going to get hurt here?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Several customers exchanged glances, the businessman in the expensive suit raising his eyebrows significantly at the elderly black man who had spoken up early. Paul Williams, the security guard, shifted his weight uncomfortably, one veteran recognizing something in another. His hand moved away from his belt, a subtle gesture not lost on the observant customers. Linda's finger finally pressed down on the first digit of 911, the sound of the beep, unnaturally loud in the hushed space. But her eyes betrayed uncertainty, a flicker of doubt crossing her face as John checked his watch again with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this would end. Sarah Johnson broke the tension with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Some people just don't understand how real banks work," she declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice carried the artificial confidence of someone desperately trying to maintain control of a situation spiraling beyond her grasp. John Smith looked at her, his eyes gentle but piercing. The scars on his hands seemed to tell more of his story than words ever could, as he placed them flat on the counter. "You're right, some people don't." The way he said it, calm, measured, knowing, made Sarah take a step back. There was something in his tone that suggested he understood banking procedures far better than anyone in the room. The teller's smug expression faltered. For the first time since this confrontation began, doubt crept across her face. The Employee of the Month badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, suddenly looking less like an achievement and more like a target. Around them, the atmosphere in the Atlanta bank had transformed. What began as a routine transaction had evolved into something that felt historic, as if everyone present knew they were witnessing something significant. The businessman in the sharp suit had stopped checking his watch entirely, completely absorbed in the unfolding drama. Miss Liu's trembling hands had steadied as she held her smartphone with surprising firmness. Her Facebook live stream soared past 4,000 viewers, comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. The hashtag Midtown Bank Shame began trending in real time, with local news accounts picking up the story and amplifying it across social media platforms. "This is going viral," someone whispered from the growing crowd of customers. Linda Martin's patience had clearly run out. The branch manager pulled out her cell phone with theatrical flourish, her finger hovering over the keypad. "I've had enough of this disruption," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. She dialed 3 numbers deliberately, making sure everyone could see. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was faintly audible in the hushed bank. Linda spoke with exaggerated volume, ensuring both John and every recording device could capture her words. "This is Linda Martin at Midtown Community Bank. We have an individual refusing to leave the premises." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes fixed on John. "Police will be here in 10 minutes. Paul Williams, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting lightly on his belt. As a fellow veteran, something about this situation felt deeply wrong to him, but his paycheck depended on following orders. John simply nodded, checking his watch again with the patience of a man who knew exactly how this story would end. The silence in the bank felt like a physical presence as John Smith reached for his leather portfolio. Every eye tracked his movements, the tension building with each deliberate motion. He opened it with practiced care, the worn leather creaking slightly under his scarred fingers. The portfolio, bearing his gold initials JS, had accompanied him through 3 military tours and countless boardrooms since. "Before they arrive, there's something you should see," John said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. He glanced at his watch again. 34 minutes. From the portfolio he extracted a single sheet of paper, not ordinary office stock, but heavy cream-colored stationery with a subtle texture that spoke of importance before a single word was read. The paper alone probably cost more than Sarah's hourly wage. John placed it face down on the counter with the precision of someone setting a chess piece for checkmate. Linda stood frozen, her hand still clutching her phone, the 911 call forgot. Michael shifted his weight nervously, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. The security guard, Paul, watched with the knowing expression of someone who recognized the calm before a storm. "What is this supposed to be?" Linda finally asked, her voice lacking its earlier authority. John didn't answer. His silence was more effective than any explanation. Mrs. Liu's fingers trembled as she adjusted her phone, ensuring her thousands of viewers wouldn't miss whatever was about to happen. The businessman in the suit had stopped checking his watch entirely, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Linda hesitated, then reached for the paper. In the Ficha Technica there's a mention of Torres, who hesitates, but this appears to be an error since Torres isn't listed among the characters. It was Linda who finally flipped the document over, her manicured fingers betraying a slight tremor. The color drained from her face so rapidly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. The Premier National Bank Board of Directors seal caught the fluorescent light, the gold embossing gleaming with undeniable authority. The branch manager's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Michael leaned forward, curiosity overcoming caution. His eyes widened as he read the document, and he physically stumbled backward as though the paper had pushed him. His elbow knocked against a brochure stand, sending pamphlets cascading to the floor with a sound like applause. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words barely audible. Sarah remained at her station, confusion warring with growing dread on her face. She couldn't see the document from her position, but the reactions of her superiors told her everything she needed to do. The livestream comment section exploded with questions. "What's on the paper? What's happening? Someone tell us." John stood perfectly still, the eye of a hurricane that was about to engulf them all. Sarah Johnson snatched the paper from the counter, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned its contents. The bravado that had fueled her condescension moments earlier evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. The crisp black text against the premium stationery was unmistakable. John Smith, Chief Risk Officer and Board Member, Premier National Bank. "I don't understand," she stammered, her Employee of the Month badge suddenly feeling like a lead weight on her chest. The silence that followed was electric, charged with the collective realization of what had just transpired. Miss Liu's Facebook livestream, which had been steadily gaining viewers, suddenly exploded to 9,000 people watching in real time. The comment section scrolled faster than anyone could read, a digital avalanche of shock, outrage and vindication. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the line. Paul Williams, who had been reluctantly approaching John, snapped to attention with the instinctive response of a former military man, recognizing a superior officer. His posture straightened, his expression shifting from reluctant enforcer to respectful subordinate. The businessman in the sharp suit, who had been documenting everything on his smartphone, lowered his device slightly and leaned toward the young mother beside him. "We just witnessed the greatest plot twist in banking history," he whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. A ripple of laughter spread through the assembled customers, not cruel mockery, but the nervous, relieved sound of tension breaking. It was the laughter of amazement, of witnessing justice materialize in real time. John remained calm, his scarred hands now resting comfortably on his leather portfolio. The gold initials JS caught the fluorescent light as he stood there, the eye of a hurricane that had formed around him. "The board sent me to conduct field research on customer experience," he explained, his voice level. "I've been visiting branches incognito for 3 weeks. Michael Davis tugged at his suddenly too tight collar, his earlier swagger replaced by the pallor of someone who realized their career was hanging by a thread. "Sir, I had no idea," he began, but John raised a hand, silencing him. The teenager who had been streaming on TikTok whispered excitedly to her followers, "You guys, this is better than any reality show." Mrs. Liu's stream continued to climb past 10,000 viewers as local news outlets began picking up the story. The elderly woman smiled, her earlier distress replaced by satisfaction, as she captured the moment when the tables had so dramatically turned. The branch had become a theater, and everyone, staff, customers, and thousands of online viewers, was witnessing an unscripted drama of accountability unfolding before their eyes. Linda Martin found her voice, barely. This can't be real." Her fingers trembled as she held the heavy paper, the embossed gold seal catching the fluorescent lights. The branch manager's authoritative demeanor crumbled with each passing second. "I assure you it's quite real," John replied, his scarred hands resting calmly on the counter. The same hands that had endured combat now weathered this battle with equal resolve. Sarah Johnson backed away, her Employee of the Month badge suddenly seeming to mock her. The teller's face had lost all color, her previous smugness evaporated into thin air. Around them the phones of customers continued recording, documenting her fall from arrogance to horror. The paper, the embossing, and the sinking realization told them everything they needed to know. John Smith pulled out his business card with deliberate slowness. Midtown Community Bank, Chief Risk Officer. He placed it beside the torn pieces of his disability check, the juxtaposition speaking volumes. "Feel free to call and verify," he said, his calm more devastating than any shout could have been. The security guard Paul shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the look of a fellow veteran who had outmaneuvered an ambush. Michael Davis stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "We had no idea, sir." The assistant manager's voice cracked, his earlier patronizing tone completely vanished. John's reply was surgical. "You had no idea I was someone who mattered." The question hung in the air, indicting not just the 3 bank employees before him, but an entire system. Miss Liu's livestream counter ticked upward, 12,000 viewers now witnessing this moment of reckoning. Linda attempted to regain composure, straightening her blazer. There must be some misunderstanding. We were simply following protocol for suspicious. Suspicious, John interrupted, his voice still measured. What exactly made my government-issued check suspicious, Ms. Martin? The branch manager opened her mouth, then closed it. No acceptable answer existed. The businessman who had been recording stepped forward. I'd like to close my accounts today, he announced loudly enough for the live stream to catch. Sarah reached for the torn check pieces, as if fixing this small thing might somehow undo the catastrophe. We can tape this together, sir. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. John looked at his watch again. The inconvenience, he repeated, the understatement hanging in the air. I think we're well beyond inconvenience now. The young mother with her baby whispered to another customer. He knew exactly what he was doing the whole time. Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The regional office was already aware. The assistant manager looked at it like it might explode in his hand. The cameras captured every reaction as John dialed a number from memory. The room fell silent, everyone straining to hear the conversation that would determine their fate. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional notification ping from Mrs. Liu's phone broke the tension. Patricia Lee, Regional Director, answered the voice on speakerphone, her warm tone cutting through the silence like a knife through butter. John, how's field research going? Patricia asked casually, unaware she was addressing an audience of terrified bank employees and captivated customers. The color drained from Linda Martin's face as realization dawned. Sarah Johnson's hands trembled, her Employee of the Month badge suddenly feeling like a lead weight. Michael Davis loosened his tie further, struggling to breathe as John Smith explained the situation with clinical precision. Time to implement Protocol 7, John stated calmly, his scarred hands steady as he held the phone. The businessman in the sharp suit whispered to the elderly black man beside him. Protocol 7? That sounds serious. The older man nodded, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. Patricia's response came without hesitation. Confirmed, implementing now. Do you need me on site? That would be helpful, John replied. Then, with perfect timing, and bring the helicopter. The word helicopter reverberated through the branch. Paul Williams, the security guard, suppressed a smile. As a fellow veteran, he recognized the sweet taste of vindication. Linda attempted damage control, her authoritative demeanor crumbling. Mr. Smith, perhaps we can discuss this privately in my office. I think we're past that point, John responded, gesturing to Mrs. Liu's phone where the viewer count had surpassed 15,000. The hashtag Midtown Bank Shame was trending nationally. Outside, the wail of sirens approached, not for John, but for the spectacle unfolding. News vans screeched to a halt in the parking lot, reporters scrambling with equipment. Michael slumped against the counter. We were just following procedure, he mumbled. Were you? John asked quietly. When you ignored my military ID? When you judged me by my appearance? When you surrounded me like a criminal? Sarah's smugness had evaporated completely. I didn't know. That's precisely the problem, John interrupted. You didn't know who I was, so you felt entitled to treat me with contempt.